Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the Learning Journeys podcast from Lacuna Learning. We hope you are all keeping well, and in our second episode we are delighted to be joined today by Lynn. Originally a PE teacher, Alan is a hugely experienced coach, developer, mentor, and in a previous life was a successful academic. He is currently national coach at Scottish Swimming and also has the dubious honour of having given me my first proper job many years ago, and is a good friend, so always a pleasure to catch up. So many thanks for your time, Alan.
Thank you, Doug. It's nice to be on the other side of the podcast microphone. I seem to be the de facto host of Scottish Swimming. I'm not sure how I managed to get that job on top of all the other things I do.
So by way of warming us up today, what is now becoming a regular feature on the podcast, I've got a question for you that I'm going to ask everyone. So if you could go on an adventure anywhere in the world, where would you go? Who would you go with? And what would you do?
Well, I did actually, I must admit, listen to your first podcast, and I'm now a wee bit sorry that I did, because I want to go to Nepal, which is what you and Liz said you wanted to do. It's always been a sort of dream of mine to do. I don't have a bucket list as such. I'm very fortunate to travel a lot. I have travelled a lot in my job and in my life. I've rafted and I've climbed and all sorts of things, but Nepal fascinates me. But I want to do it the proper way. Get to Kathmandu, see that, and then take the 2.5 weeks or whatever it is to walk to base camp, like one of my friends did as soon as he left university, which is really what I should have done. Then I've given you a different answer this morning.
That's okay. It's your choice. You can go wherever you want. The fact that we've all said Nepal, we need somebody next time to say somewhere else, or maybe just say something really local that we'd like to go and do they've not done yet. Listen, you've had a pretty interesting, extensive journey and career, so I'd just love to unpick that a little bit today. So could you maybe just start at the beginning? Tell us, how did you get into sport in the first place? What's that journey been like for you?
So I'm originally from Port Glasgow, which is a town on the Clyde, the Port of Glasgow as it once was. I learned to swim there, and as a result of a bunch of us learning to swim at the same time, we formed a swimming club, or our parents did, and that led to a little bit of training and a little bit of competition and getting reasonably good at it. And almost all of that original group moved from Port Glasgow to a very successful club called Paisley, and we swam there for quite some time, all of us, certainly through our secondary school and into our university years. And all of my coaches at Paisley Swimming Club were PE teachers, which leads me on to one of the things you mentioned in the introduction. A lot of those influences in my teenage years as a competitive swimmer were from PE teachers, and that's where that next stage of my journey went to. I swam at a reasonable level. I was in the Commonwealth Games squad for 1982, didn't quite make the cut, and thereafter was training to be a PE teacher, and decided about halfway through that course that I wasn't going to be in the frame for the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games, and decided to start to coach and teach as a means to make some money as a student, as we all do. So between working in a bar and teaching and coaching swimming, I managed to earn some money and did all the things that we do at that age, and bought a car and became independent and so on. So yeah, swimming, teaching, coaching, all stemming from learning to swim at Port Glasgow Baths, as it was once called.
Wow, what a great little story. I've known you for years. I've never actually asked you how you got into swimming in the first place and how that came to be. Did you do any other sports growing up, or were you really just swimming was the thing?
Swimming was the thing. I was in the boys' brigade, and so I played football and did what they used to call gymnastics. It was really vaulting and so on. But I was keen on everything, but didn't really get the chance to do very much other than swimming until I went to PE college, when obviously I had to do lots and lots of other sports as part of my training. So keen on sport, always have been, and loved the opportunity that PE college gave me to do those other things that up until that point as a swimmer I didn't really get the chance to do.
Okay, wow, how interesting. Now, I suppose what is these days probably quite unique is that coaching and teaching to some extent started together for you, that you were doing doing both. I'm really interested, when you went to become a PE teacher and you began learning about that process, how did what you'd learned from coaching kind of dovetail with that?
Yeah, I probably, as you've alluded to there, teaching and coaching are synonymous with me, and vice versa. I probably was as keen on both as I was on anything else. Learning about learning, if I could put it that way, or learning about education as part of my PE teacher training, I think has been invaluable for me. And as you know, I bang on about that kind of stuff quite a lot. And for me, teaching and coaching in a sporting context is about learning completely. Whether you're a top class athlete or whether you're a beginner, the process of whatever it is that we do to engage with them is about learning for me, and always has been, always will be. And I think giving me something solid to base that on, as I did as a trainee teacher, I think has stuck with me for a long, long time.
Okay, so I'm dead interested because you kind of skimmed it a little bit. Where did the coaching journey go? Obviously, you went off to be a teacher, but presumably coaching carried on for you during that time.
Yeah, it did. I did it alongside. I mean, teaching was more of a sort of what would you say, seasonal thing. So when the schools were off, there was opportunities to teach swimming more than there was during term time, because I was training, and coaching started. I always laugh at this place I started. I was the 5th level coach in a swimming club way back in those days in the 1980s, and the 4 coaches who were above me, if you like, in the pecking order, were all incredibly successful PE teachers and coaches in their own right. So I started at not even the bottom of the ladder, the middle of the ladder as far as the club was concerned, and learned, I always used to say, I learned how not to be a parent. Even if I'd never had kids in my life, I knew how not to be a parent from watching the parents of swimmers when I was coaching their 10, 11 and 12-year-old kids. Fascinating opportunity to interact with people who were only interested in one thing in life, and that was how their son or daughter could get to swim in the relay team or to get picked for such and such a squad. It was quite interesting. Of course, that follows through with me now to my job as a day job as National Coach of Scottish Swimming, having to deal with swimming parents again in a slightly different context. But yeah, coaching was something probably from my late teens onwards that has stuck with me. And although I've had various jobs that you've mentioned earlier on, coaching or helping coaches has stuck with me all of that time.
That's really interesting. Now, you're a very humble character, so you've neglected some important things for our listeners, which is that you have coached some pretty fast swimmers over the years. You have coached people at Commonwealth Games level and so on. So how did that all come to be?
People who influenced me, my own coaches, obviously, but people, once I started to think about coaching more seriously, director of swimming at the time, who's no longer with us, Hammy Smith, and my you call me your first real boss, my sort of first real boss in this context, a guy called John Lyle, who we both know. And they really influenced me into taking coaching much more seriously. I got a head coach's job in Stirling, where I currently reside, and started to coach at the club there. And we had some good kids, and they got better. Some of them did really well. I've been in Olympic finals and won Commonwealth Games and so on. So it was lovely to be part of that journey with them. I gave up a very solid, very well-paid job at the time with what was called the Scottish Sports Council, now Sport Scotland, because I wanted to pursue a passion, which was coaching. I had no idea how I was going to pay the mortgage or the rent or the shopping bill, but I knew I wanted to coach, and that everything else sort of became subordinate to that. And I'm still here, I'm still kicking, and whatever it was a fantastic learning experience. Taking the plunge, as it were, no plunge intended, to coach full time with no safety net.
Yeah, no, I very much know that feeling of I've no idea how I'm going to do this or how I'm going to pay the mortgage, but let's just do it anyway. And then somewhere along that road, you found yourself moving into the academic sphere. How did that come to be?
Yeah, I need to correct you on that, because you had a lovely description, introduction of me, but I always called myself a pracademic, as you know, which speaks to my philosophy of all of these things, which is doing is much better than knowing or talking about knowing. So yeah, I hope I brought with me my experience in teaching and coaching to everything I did as a university lecturer, teacher, senior teaching fellow as I became. And for me, that was crucial, is to bring some realism or to use probably the appropriate philosophical basis, pragmatism, to what I talked about to students. And that included student PE teachers, which was lovely at Strathclyde University, and student coaches, sports scientists, sports development, people at Stirling University, where I was for 7 years.
Okay, you've just provided me the perfect sort of segue there into where you are now, I guess. I've just noted down something you said there. Doing is much better than knowing, and there's something really powerful in that for everyone, I think. So it would be my assumption, and it might be the wrong assumption, that the opportunity to go to Scottish Swimming as national coach would be something of a dream gig. Would that be fair?
Well, yes, of course. It was Dream Gig Part 3. If I just explain, I did work for Scottish Swimming in the late 80s when I coached in Stirling for the first time. I was a sort of part-time development officer. They only had, I think, 4 members of staff at the time, and I was added on to that. So we were a very small governing body, as they all were in those days. And then before I started the academic gig, I was the technical director for Scottish Swimming around about the time of the Manchester Commonwealth Games and Sydney Olympics. So I went away, did my academic thing, my pra-academic thing, and then came back to, again, an opportunity which I didn't think was going to present itself, to be national coach. So yeah, it's fantastic to be back. It's a sport that as I've described, been involved in for quite a lot of years, and to be leading the programme from position of national coach is great. But again, it's all about what people are doing as opposed to what they think they know.
I won't steal your thunder because I kind of know, I think, where you're going to go with this in a minute. National coach, there would be a presumption from some that you're like the guru coach, you know everything and you know it all. But I know a bit differently than that. In terms of your role then, how does that break down in terms of time spent working with swimmers, working with coaches, management, so on? What does that look like?
Yeah, we don't go for that guru charismatic thing in Scottish Swimming. We did for a while, in fairness, and it worked really well with a good friend of mine. But we, I think now, are trying to build a more solid future for ourselves. So my role includes heading up the national programme, working with swimmers and coaches on squad weekends, national team trips, Commonwealth Games, etc. And part of that role extends to working with British Swimming in terms of their teams and squads as well. But a large part of, I think, what I bring to the job is around coach development. And my work is done largely through coaches rather than directly with swimmers. So I have no day-to-day or week-to-week responsibility for a group, but I do have an oversight, if you like, of the programme of swimmer development and work, as I've said, more directly with coaches. That does include being on deck, so I don't sit in the balcony and take notes, and I don't pass judgment on things that I don't know anything about. But I do enjoy getting on deck, having a stopwatch if required, and working with coaches to hopefully improve their practice and also, obviously, the performance of their swimmers.
Okay, so we're in a pretty interesting space talking about developing other coaches, and I suppose there's probably been this historic thing that at some point you do enough coaching that they go, you must be able to teach other coaches to do what you do. Talk to us a bit about maybe your working process in terms of how you like to work with coaches, and maybe some of the practices that you have found to be most effective in supporting their development and their progression and the progression of the swimmers with them.
Yeah, I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier, or someone I mentioned earlier. That's John Lyle, who my role with John was at a thing called the National Coaching Centre, which was at Cramond Murray House College, as it became Edinburgh University, as it became even after that. And I was like a coaching development officer, and it was essentially learning at the feet of one of then and now the most respected thinkers and writers about coaching. And very early on, John and I agreed that one of us had to be credible, continuing to be credible in the field. And John was an international volleyball coach. He coached Murray International, the Scottish team. So he was more credible than me at one point, and then he decided he wanted to pursue an academic route, and I became the more active coach in that partnership. But John's influence on me was significant in terms of how I began to think about coaching, how I began to think about developing coaches and helping coaches to learn, to the extent that, although not immediately, once I had gone away and coached full time and decided I wanted to look at this a bit further, I did the master's program in coaching that John ran and graduated from that at Edinburgh University in the late 90s, early noughties, whenever that actually was. And that has stuck with me to the extent that I set up 2 master's programs of my own when I was at Stirling. But that's kind of by the by. I took with me all of that, I guess, theoretical, conceptual basis for what coaching is and what coaching should be, and carry that with me to the work that I do just now. And whilst I'm not hung on any particular theory, I do think you need to get down and dirty in the weeds, or the swamplands, as Robin Jones calls it, where you're actually working with coaches in situ, or as we like to call it, learning at work with them directly on deck. Taking that away and tossing it around and discussing it over a cup of coffee or whatever needs to be done, but that has to be tested, it has to be seen, and it has to be practiced, and then you generate the feedback that takes you and the coach forward.
God, how interesting is that? I've written down quite a lot there, actually. This idea of being academically informed, but you're in the swampland, you're on deck, you're in whatever that environment is, so you can touch it, and it's that idea of learning in the field, learning at work. So things are okay in theory, but what about in practice? Something you said earlier on, I just want to pull on, if that's okay, and you've said this to me a few times, this one of us needed to be credible, which made me smile. And interestingly, when I started my current job, my PD boss agreed that I needed to keep coaching, and that was partly so I didn't forget what it was like, but also partly so I was credible. What does credibility look like? Some people will have, been high-level athletes in the past, so they might have credibility because of that. Some people, like myself, haven't had that opportunity or that experience. What does that look like, and how do you go about maybe showing that to the people you work with?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, one of my popular glib phrases is "show me your scars, show me your medals." And credibility is no more complicated than that. People need to know that I'm going to use lots of different metaphors throughout this, as you can imagine, in the trenches, in the swamp, whatever your preferred description of that is. People need to know that you've done that. And whilst that, in my case, could have been quite some time ago in terms of being an active coach, the other things that you do between then and now are important too. So whether that's fighting the cause for coaches at a committee level, or whether it's working, as I have done through many, many years, almost as soon as I started coaching, I started to run coach education courses, pushed very, very strongly by the director of swimming at the time. And that has been something where I guess I've gained some credibility, because probably all of the coaches, bar a very, very small number, have gone through some form of coach education with me as a tutor, to use that popular expression. So that gains you credibility too. I've written books, which I'm not, fussed about in terms of my name or my bank balance, but that gives you credibility. And then you earn your spurs, don't you, by helping people, by working with them, and them thinking, that was useful, giving them information which they could go away and use. So it's horses for courses, really. For some people, it'll be, who did you coach? What do they do? For other people, it'll be, how can you help me? And if that comes off positively, then I suppose it doesn't do your credibility any harm.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That was I was expecting a good answer, and I definitely got one there. I suppose what I was writing down there, this idea that people need to know that you've done that. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to have the same experience, but that you have an idea of what it's like to be in that position. So I guess what I'm wondering, if this is maybe partly about empathy, that I get you, I get where you're at right now, I have been in a similar position before, so I can understand that, and then maybe can I help you?
Yeah, there is definitely that, and I hope you display what you've just said in the way that you conduct yourself. For me, it's not always about, and I know you didn't mean this, but It's not always about, oh, well, when I was coaching or when I coached so and so. I despise that kind of way of people trying to justify themselves. If you can't be credible in the here and now, then you shouldn't really be doing what you're doing. It doesn't matter what you did 20 years ago or what your swimmers did 20 years ago. If you want to be current and credible now, then you need to be there for the people who are around you at the moment. And that's really about being there for them and their needs, not about what you think they need. So, yeah, that's definitely empathy in anyone's dictionary.
Yeah, no, thanks. That was exactly what I meant. I didn't mean you've been there before. Oh, I've been there before, so you should just do what I did. But it's more that I know what that might feel like for you right now, and I can connect with you in that way.
Yeah, but we both know there are people who who are only thinking themselves as credible because that's what they did.
Yeah,
so the less said about them, the better.
Yeah, and that certainly has never been my experience of you in terms of the way you work for people and you back people and you maybe see potential in them. That's certainly something people always say about you, that you have this ability to see somebody who could be good at something, which I think is a really great quality in any mentor or coach developer. So moving very sadly towards the end of our conversation, thinking about maybe advice you might give to other coaches, young coaches or young coach developers out there, given all your many, many years in the field, in the trenches, getting the scars, as you put it so elegantly earlier, what might be some of your advice or thoughts or nuggets that you might have for them?
Yeah, I'm still the only person in my family to have any kind of university degree, to bachelor's or beyond. So I always advise people to be curious. I don't know where I got that from. My house and my garage full of books, to the extent that I really need to ship some of them on to a good home. And so I don't know where I developed that curiosity from, but I have it, and I'm always seeking new information, new knowledge. I think I'm responsible for some of Jeff Bezos's initial profits as the owner of Amazon, when I was only buying books from that place. So I would always encourage young coaches in particular, but everybody, to be curious, seek out information they think will be useful, and not in a linear, straightforward, right in front of you kind of way. Read across a breadth of information, whether that's business, whether it's leadership, whether it's psychology, or indeed other sports to your own. All of that, I think, is significant and important. Yeah, I suppose in some ways that makes you quite boring because you're always thinking of ways to be better at what you do. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested in things outside of sport, but I still think of, oh, well, how can that ballet performance, or how can that theatre production, how does that link to how we do things in sport, or in my case, in swimming? So I'm always trying to connect stuff up that way. And I would urge everyone not to be afraid to ask questions of people who they think are more experienced, more knowledgeable than they are, particularly coaches. I've never once come across a coach who's refused a question or a inquiry from a younger coach to, why do you do that, and what's that for, and can you give me a drill for this, or whatever the query is. Young coaches are sometimes quite reticent to do that, but I would always encourage them to ask the questions. I know I did, and I was grateful for the responses I got, and it's a bit of a kind of pay it forward kind of thing for your sport. Ask the question, find out the answer, and be ready to do the same thing for the next person who comes along.
Thanks, Alan. As always, you manage a rule of three. So we've got three amazing things there. So one is be curious, read broadly. Second thing you said there was don't be afraid to ask questions of others. You're absolutely right. No one ever really refuses to answer your question or to share what they know. I've never had that once happen. And the third thing really you said there right at the end was give back. You know, that sport has given you loads of amazing things. So at some point the time will come for you to give something back. So don't be afraid to do that. We could undoubtedly continue this conversation for many, many, many hours, and sadly, we just don't have time. I'm so grateful to you for the time you've given us and things you've shared. There are a whole host of nuggets in there for people listening at home, so I hope you picked up on some of them. Things I've written down. Doing is much better than knowing. I quite like that. That's sitting with me. And this idea of being a real person and being someone that they know that you get them, you get what it's like to be them in that position right now. That's sort of sitting with me as well. So, Alan, thank you so much. Where can people keep in touch in terms of your updates and what you're up to and what you're doing next and so on?
I am on Twitter at ALYNSWIM, so at Alan Swim. If anybody's really keen to contact me about anything, my email address is a.lynn@scottishswimming.com. Given what I just said, I will not ignore your emails and inquiries and try and help you along the way if I can. I should say, if you're listening to this and running, I apologise if we've made you stumble. I hope you haven't fallen asleep through the last 20, 30 minutes or so, but I will be willing to. I'm on Instagram, but I really don't post that often. I'm a bit of a lurker when it comes to that. I like to see what other people are doing, but I'm not interesting enough to put anything on my own up.
Okay, great. Well, he is very active on Twitter these days, so do keep an eye out. He always has something worth reading to share, so just keep an eye out on that. Everyone at home, thank you for listening. Do keep an eye out for future podcasts. The intent is to put these out on a fairly regular basis, and do hit subscribe if you want to make sure you never miss out. And obviously at the moment, the most important thing is everyone stay safe. So thank you all very much for listening.